The ease with which the body moves its arms is a delight to the ordinary observer. The arm is extended towards the target by a wave-like propagation of a bend that travels from the base of the arm towards the tip. Similar bend propagation is seen in other arm movements, such as locomotion and searching. An important control variable in reaching movement is the bend position in space and time. The propagating bend is accompanied by a wave of muscle activation whose level correlates with the velocity profiles of the bend movements. The muscles in these structures not only create the movement, but also supply the skeletal support. The arm lacks either external or internal skeletal elements. The arm can bend at any point in any direction and can elongate, shorten, and twist with the ability to execute various sophisticated tasks such as catching a target, building a shelter, manipulating objects, and opening a jar. The different reaching movements vary in speed and distance, but maintain a basic velocity pattern repeated in both target-oriented and spontaneous movements. The control of such a wide freedom of movement is highly distributed, and it is simplified by the use of stereotyped movements, such as, for example, a temporary reconfiguration of the arm into a stiff, articulated, quasi-jointed structure. Bend propagation in spontaneous movements occurs either when the arm is moving freely in the water, unconstrained movements, or when the arm is extended along a solid surface, constrained movements. Certain muscles can be activated to produce a local stiffening, which allows exerting forces to the environment. 1 to 4 arms can join the task simultaneously, and the direction and speed of the move is the simple combined vector of those arms. The single arm pushing is performed by a rhythmical, stepping-like motion composed of 5 stages. 1. Shortening the proximal arm segment, sometimes with and sometimes without shortening the rest of the arm. 2. Sticking some proximal suckers to the surface. 3. Elongating the proximal segment between the attached part and the base of the arm. 4. Releasing the attached suckers. And 5, shortening again to its basic length. It is suggested that the brain issues commands to orient the arm direction and set the extension parameters, whereas the details for muscle activation are represented and carried out within the neuromuscular system of the arm itself. The arms can extend, retract, grasp, seek, and feel independently from each other. This suggests that the central nervous system does not exert a fine control on each single part of the arm, but rather that the interaction between body and environment provides the feedback to produce a proper movement autonomously. The principle of embodied intelligence illustrates how intelligence is not only related to the nervous system, but also to other parts of the body. During the pushing action, it is reasonable to consider the proximal part of the arm stiffened. The arm segment proximal to the bend is maintained relatively straight, and the bend is always curved dorsally. The traveling bend is associated with a propagating wave of muscle activation, with maximal muscle activation slightly preceding the traveling bend. The bend travels along a simple planar path connecting the body with the location of an external target. The path of this bend is confined to a plane, and the bend propagates according to an invariant basic velocity profile. A different mechanism for bend propagation has been argued for: a stiffening wave caused by a symmetrical muscle activation pattern that propagates along the arm and propels an existing bend. Bending results from a selective contraction of longitudinal muscles on one side of the arm, together with the contraction of transverse muscles to resist shortening. The arms can either move together or move one after the other. The simple and stereotyped nature of the reaching movement can reduce the complexity of the control of the flexible arm. Arm movements provide an extreme example of controlled movements of a flexible arm with virtually unlimited degrees of freedom. Increasing the number of degrees of freedom of the arm makes this task more complicated, and yet most biological movements involve a large number of degrees of freedom. The complexity of these transformations is attributable partly to the excess degrees of freedom of the limb compared with the number of degrees of freedom of the end effector or those available at the task level. The movement is not based on pulling or paddle-like pushing. The body can squeeze into very small and narrow holes, or it can splay over prey. The biomechanical principles of movement generation differ in bodies with and without a rigid skeleton. Crawling is the most varied mode of locomotion, involving so many postures and patterns that just a few have been defined. While crawling, only the arms opposite to the crawling direction are used for pushing the body. The orientation of the body does not change, even when turning in a new direction, i.e., there is no body rotation. Able to conform to obstacles, to different terrain, and to variably sized objects, the body can therefore carry soft and fragile objects. Thus, it is most reasonable to assume that the movement of the arm is the outcome of both pre-planned feed-forward central commands and interactions with the environment through the local sensory motor circuits.
Hello and welcome to the performance room where Alexandra, the artist, is going to join us to answer questions, having just disentangled herself from the performance. You can put questions to her via the usual channels of Facebook, Google+, or Twitter. And I'd just like to introduce everybody else in the team who's also going to be part of this Q&A. This is Hendrik, who's the research curator on the project. Tobias, who's the sound designer, who composed music also that the dancers used to work with. Gabriel and Anna, who have just been performing, who you've seen. And Cosima, who's designed the costumes. Alexandra, thank you so much. That was really an extraordinary performance. Are you okay? Just come straight into. We're getting some questions in and comments from people. But I wanted to ask you first of all a little bit about working without an audience live. You actually said you find that more intimidating than having people there, which I find hard to understand because it seems to me worse the other way. But you often work between formats, the gallery and the theatre, and now online. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, that's true. I'm used to adapt the work to different circumstances and contexts and spaces also. But to not have an audience there with which you could establish a dialogue is kind of awkward and also interesting. And it's the first time that I'm doing something for such a specific format, actually, as the online space here.
There's the question was asking that, is it less intimate? From Feisty 50s on Twitter. Is it less intimate for you then?
No, I think actually that this is kind of more intimate than when you do something for an audience that's present. Because at any time you still feel the presence of those people and you know in some way how that can swing back and forth. But this somehow feels very voyeuristic and sort of it puts you in this vulnerable position where you feel quite exposed, I think.
And you developed this project together with, you've often worked before in the same project in the gallery or in the theatre context.
Yeah, for this work, also we sort of worked on 3 different versions, one for the museum space, one for the theatre space, and then this piece we just saw that we did because you asked me to. And I really liked the opportunity.
You weren't sure at first, I remember.
Yeah. So then we were thinking of we worked on a body of work that has to do with transposition and kind of online tutorials of a kind, to be able to develop one online tutorial that we would do for the performance room. That is a specific one. But the other material that we use in the piece that we also perform in the theatre and in the museum is a little bit extended. It's not just on this specific choreography that we've just seen now. So this would be a part out of that, but sort of blown up here in a specific way.
Yeah. And is this, the idea of learning something from an online tutorial seems kind of the opposite of how I imagine you learn dance. You train as a dancer. I don't know, how does this speak to your practice as a dancer, a performer who's trained in dance?
Well, actually, recently I've come across more and more sort of online learning or tutorials. Like, I have friends, for instance, who take acting classes via Skype or online, and also myself, I do yoga or things like that from online instructions. And then in terms of learning from a screen, that's something that I was already busy with as a teenager, because I had to learn roles from VHS or something like this when you suddenly replace someone. So
I know Yvonne Rainer, for example, thinks it's very problematic to learn a dance from a screen.
Yeah.
But I guess in this piece you're playing with that flatness somehow.
Well, also in this piece we very much used the method of learning through online tutorials as a tool we used, as a strategy basically, to produce material. And to me personally, it is also a forced way of learning or a forced way to exercise. But I thought that's an interesting format because it's something that people share so much nowadays, and that they want to sort of share their personal space with a large audience that they never see. And so we tried to use it very strongly as the basis of how we also interact among us and how we pass the material from a theoretical background to study it in a kind of contemporary phenomena situation, and then again make an exercise out of that and sort of mirror it back on stage and use it among us. So there were different moments of that kind that we sort of started to loop around and learn from each other in this way.
And actually that relates to why we did this series, because we were thinking about that space of communication that's very normal through Skype, or rather than it being something out there that's technological. There's a comment from Anna Isabella in Barcelona, who said, "I had no idea what I'd find here, but it makes an interesting dance," and asks what inspired you. You've talked a bit about the online tutorials, but could you say something about the choice of costume and the kind of movement?
Sure, the online tutorial is one kind of framework, but I think on On a larger field of interest, it's very much about the body and its expression possibilities and communication possibilities. And in that sense, I was interested in the body without bones and how that could be an option for a human being to behave as if the body has no bones in order to become someone else or to enter a field of fantasy that you really want to appropriate. And so we were studying the movement of the octopus, the animal, and how sort of the octopus arms work, and they move in all directions at the same time in a way. So it's kind of very interesting because that's impossible for us to do that or to reproduce that. And so we were studying this closely.
And then how did you arrive at these costumes, the muscle suits, and for you two, the nude suits?
I mean, we were thinking about layers, skins and layers, and also shifting them. So we would have like a muscle suit on top of the skin, like in kind of a reverse. And we decided to go for this really almost photorealistic digital print, which gives it, especially now in this online streaming, like kind of a animated look, for example. And the nude suits, like we both are wearing, is like more an archetype of a body. So in the other parts of the dance piece, they're doing some ballet stuff. And this really reduces the movement to just so it's for its movement.
It's kind of funny how much the history of performance art was about real nudity and about sort of, actionist exposure of the inside of the body to be authentic. And you've put that back onto the surface and made it fake. But at the same time, it's quite physical.
I guess for us it was a very interesting point of discussion, how to work, for many of us for the first time in this online space, which, is more often than not so disembodied. And then to sort of create this extreme physicality in it, not only sort of in the choreography, but definitely in the costumes, but then bring it back to some kind of digital animated print, which then denies that physicality. And so that interplay between being physical, embodied and disembodied is, I think, quite interesting in this piece.
Yeah, and it kind of makes everything into surface, this continuous surface. There's a question about the text piece, where it came from. And
it's a compilation of different scientific texts that write about the octopus, actually, that we put together in order to produce instruction material that functions online next to the movement. So it's not so much describing the movement, but more like imagining what would it be, or like ask people to imagine what would it be to move with a body of that kind, which is a body without bones. And so when we do the exercise of try to move as an octopus, we actually never listen to the text. So it's not that we do it after the text. So we do it actually to a soundtrack that helps us move in a certain speed. And we try to think of the physical task of the body being in every moment sort of attentive to what it meets and all the surfaces around and surrounding us.
Tobias, could you say something about them, or maybe share a bit of the music?
I think that's also really interesting about this format, that we can have a sound in here that is different from the one that the audience have. So that's what we're doing. Like in here, the performers, they have a soundtrack. I can maybe show a short example of it. So they don't move to the text the audience hears. They move to something like this. And I think somehow like a tutorial or something like a soundtrack, this helps on the other way the performers to find into a certain kind of mood or a certain kind of body language and another tempo.
Gabriel, how do you begin to work like that? Because do you come from training in ballet? Like that's very different. Oh, you study ballet on one hand, I mean.
Yeah. In this piece, you mean?
Yeah, like how do you deal with this music as
the music
an instruction?
helps us get into a mood, as you were saying, gets us into a floating and sort of aquatic mood somehow. But yeah, we function more through instructions of how to deal with the floor, thinking of having different limbs moving at the same time in different directions and keeping it smooth and as if you're kind of hovering over the floor. So the music functions more like a kind of an effective helping us to be on the same tune.
How would that compare to the classical dance class?
Certainly very different. Yeah, there is very formalized, and we also
Yeah.
played with the dance, with the classical ballet dance vocabulary. There is very strict and very coded, and we played with it in different layers. We played first with the coded language in French. You can really describe a classical ballet sequence just with words by saying balancer à droite, balancer à gauche, balancer en tournant. But you also can describe it by gesturing. The ballet teachers or ballet masters, they can really just explain to you a whole exercise by referring to the hands, or just by just marking and half talking and half talking about the counts and half indicating in space. And we also played with the American Sign Language to add more details to.
This is in Alexandra's.
All that in the work,
in the theatre
version,
yeah.
of this piece. Yeah.
So you're moving between these different registers of instruction and dance.
Yeah, and kind of this link of body and language, and in what way it manifests itself in the convention of dance also. And that was like kind of where the ballet exercise came from or came in.
Yeah. And there's a question from Acacia Finbow in Cambridge. With a piece so bound up in the digital and online, what do you think about the documentation of your work?
What I think about
usually,
it?
I mean, I guess in this piece it's collapsed into one.
Yeah, in general, I try to make one good recording of one of the shows, and there is photographic material, there is instructions for the dancers or among the dancers, and there could be actually some kind of a score or script be done of most of the pieces, which is a huge work. I don't always do it. Sometimes I'm forced to do it because it's important to be able to pass it on, but until now I didn't have time to do it for all my work I made. But that would theoretically be possible.
So here it's an added pressure for the two to be simultaneous, I guess.
Well, and even more than that, like in the exhibition version, actually the piece consists of an installation that consists of this, movement with the text that everyone just heard also projected on an opposite screen. So it does sort of continue that. I wouldn't call it documentation, but it's sort of it continues the strand of a performance being extended into other formats and more sort of permanent installations as well.
There's a comment here, another comment from Anna Isabella in Barcelona, who's saying, visually I was reminded of the video clips of Hey Boy, Hey Girl and Rock DJ. Did they influence your vision at all?
No.
No? The pop song has been a theme, and I'm very interested in how you often assimilate a given format and play with that, maybe in a resistant way. But is that something you think is central to how you work?
You and me, we used to be together, every day together, always. I really feel that I'm losing my best friend. I can't believe this could be the end. It looks as though you're letting go, and if it's real, well, I don't want to know. Don't speak, I know just what you're saying, so please stop explaining. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Don't speak, I know what you're thinking, and I don't need your